Future Silverain here. Unfortunately, some of the footage in this video is a bit laggy, mostly because of the performance issues in the game. Greetings and salutations! This is Jason Silverain, and I've survived yet another year around the sun, so I was gifted with Outer Worlds by a friend of mine. If you're unfamiliar with Outer Worlds, it is a apparently award-winning single-player RPG from Obsidian Entertainment, much like their Fallout series. But with a twist, it's more of a case of take Fallout, take Borderlands, and then add a bit of like 1920s sci-fi into the mix, and throw it out there. Now to clarify, this is the original Outer Worlds and not the Spacer's Choice Performance patch. Now, if you're unfamiliar with that debacle, essentially the Spacer's Choice Edition is supposedly a graphical upgrade and performance enhancement, which is completely backfired and is actually worse in nearly all regards, and it's just a patch that we have to pay for. And rather than updating the main game, it makes a separate one, much like Cyanide Studios do with the Blood Bowl games. So, no thank you to that. There's currently 2 DLCs out for it as well, each $11.99, and I will say the DLCs are pretty good, even if their finales are somewhat lackluster. If I have any big gripe about them, is because of the things that are covered in them, you'd think they'd be big changes in the story or the game, and frankly, despite big events occurring, it never seems to go anywhere. And that seems to be a major problem throughout the storytelling of this game. And make no mistake, as much as I really wanted to enjoy this game, I found as I was approaching the end game, my, enthusiasm turning to dust, much like Thanos did. Now, credit where credit is due, the art design team really blew it out the water in some areas. There was certainly 1 or 2 places where the visual effects took my breath away, mostly with the skyboxes, the initial impact of some of these places, but really it doesn't take long before it becomes very cookie cutter. You notice that there's really not much uniqueness anywhere in the game, as assets are reused, designs are reused, and I get it, we're going to a corporate place where they're trying to terraform the world, and they are going to be putting down habitations in a very rigid manner. But when you see yet another 3 broken down corporate buildings that you can't enter or have the same layout with nothing interesting in them, because most of them don't even have any enemies in or anything like that, all the enemies are outside. And as soon as you've got that door open, no, you're completely safe to loot it, and you'll probably find a load of junk that doesn't make sense. It lacks the impact and fun that you had in Fallout, where you'd go into a room and there's a plungers all over the walls, sort of thing. You know, the Marauders don't have any personality. I mean, the Psychos in Borderlands 2 were full of character, and there was lots of different types here. In Outer Worlds, well, no, they don't say anything, ever. There's probably like 4 different types. A big tanky one, a sniper, and 2 generics that kind of fight in different ways. Usually one's a melee and one's a shooter. And they have the same couple of bits of armor. You might run into corporate types who are trying to murder you. Well, they just all have the corporate armor of their corporation. They'll have slightly better weapons, and occasionally they'll yell something at you. This is slightly improved in the DLC, but those are so short that it doesn't really matter, and you never encounter those enemies outside the DLC. And even the natural critters, we have a lizard dog thing, we have a giant primate angry gorilla thing, we have a series of different critters that evolve into a giant praying mantis. And the DLC adds 2 more. Well, 3 more, sorry, but 2 of those are the variation on the giant mantises and the gorillas, so again, you go to, oh yes, and the lizard, the giant lizards that try to eat your face. So you go to each of these different planets, and it's the same enemies over and over, and combat is dull. Really dull. It's not just this tedium in the gameplay experience regarding the environments and enemies. It also carries on into the actual mechanics themselves and the plot, which I'll go into a little explanation. I'm not going to go too far in case you do want to play this, so there's not going to be too many spoilers. Now, when it comes to character building, you have a very similar thing to Fallout. You have your base stats, which come up more often in conversations than your actual conversation skills, which is quite frustrating. And then you have your skills, which are divided into small groups of 3. Now, to begin with, when you're leveling these skills, up to 50 points, every time you can level the whole skill block itself. And then after that, you level individual skills after you've got 50 points in a skill. This means that because there's only 30 levels without the DLC, which knocks it up to 36, well, you don't really have enough skill points to go around, and this game is very unusual with its skill checks. Now, the Spacer's Choice version apparently has added levels to the game, but there's mods already out there that do that, and do it probably better. No, there was actually a little bit of weirdness with this, because originally people said, oh, you don't really need to specialise your skills, because the majority of skill checks in the game are all far too easy, at least certainly early on. So, in response of this, the update that came for the game early on was to add a load of 150 point skill checks. But the real issue with them is they're just thrown in there willy-nilly with no real substance behind them. For example, the things you find in a locked chest which requires 150 points skill would be the same thing you'd find in maybe an empty locker, just more of it. And if you do a persuasion check in a conversation, you only get like 500 bits, which is the equivalent of maybe selling 3 guns. It's so poor, the rewards, and it doesn't really open up many options. Now, there is one mechanic I kind of enjoyed in the game, was you get the perks, very much like Fallout perks, which are a hell of a lot less character. And the perks themselves are frankly really dull and boring, which is a shame, but I did like the fact that certain events in the game can give you the option to develop flaws, and you gain a bonus perk because of it. And one of the fun perks is for every flaw you have, you gain an extra, I think, 5% damage. Honestly, by the end of the day, it's not worth taking any of them, because they're all very substandard and a bit dull. The most useful perks in the game is the ones that increase your walking speed, your running speed, and your carrying capacity. And everything else other than that, unless you're really trying out the science weapon build, is kind of just there. Companions too also have their own perks, all of them which are completely identical, but for a single perk line through the each companion. And some of them are better than others, but overall, again, it's quite dull. And your companions do have special abilities to use in combat, but you have to use them manually, which is actually a real pain in the ass, because I'm trying to focus on not dying. Now, there's a lot of perks you can get that can tell you not to take any of your companions either, so you can play this game without the extra companions, which means you miss out on a load of content, which is a weird option to give the player, but may be useful if you're speedrunning. The other thing that's also a massive headache with the mechanics is, for some reason, they copied Borderlands and made it so guns have levels. The problem is you'll never find guns that are appropriate level to your character. Usually you'll find ones that are weaker, which means then you have to upgrade them and tinker them to a certain point. But that becomes so costly over time, even with maxed out engineering, that you're better off trying to find a weapon that's higher level and starting it again, because it's done by how much you've tinkered it, not how much your level of the weapon is. For example, I have a level 10 gun. It costs me 67 bits to upgrade it to a level 11. But if I had a level 20 gun, it would also cost me 67 bits to upgrade it to level 21. And it's how many times you tinker a gun to improve it is where the cost increases. And the aforementioned science weapons supposedly all have really unique abilities, but if you find them and say you're level 15 and this is a level 9 gun, it not only takes forever to tinker it, you can only tinker it so far before it stops upgrading, making it really useless even with all the science weapon perks. Now, I've got a really good gun from the finale of one of the DLCs. It's one of the last science weapons you'll get, so it's going to be one of the higher level ones. And an individual shot from this gun, maxed out, does 50 damage. It shoots pretty rapidly. It has multiple effects you can apply to it, but it only does 50 damage, as opposed to my normal gun, which I've got, which does 1,000. Can you see why these things are useless? So the environments get a bit lackluster. The mechanics are somewhat boring and janky and a bit of a headache. And there's a lack of variation in the combat, which is the most way you're going to be interacting with things. So you have to think, it's a Fallout-style game. Hey, the exploration's kind of just there for fun. It's really the narrative that grabs you in these things. That's got to be good, right? Oh, I wish. I really do wish. Now, the main drive between the game is you either siding with the professor that rescues you from stasis into rescuing your fellow lost colonists, and hopefully having a fresh insight and replacing the corporate board that has taken over the colonies and driven them into the ground through desire for profit, to the point where it's like 1984 can basically take a hike. They're amateurs. I mean, there is the option, and I'll commend them for this, is to ally with the board, the corporate overlords. But why you do this, I don't know, because unlike other settings where it shows that the corporations are actually on top of things, yeah, everyone's underneath them and miserable and just grinding to get through the day, but overall, things kind of work. They're so comically inept that there is no question that the colonies are going to die if no one does anything. So it's so short-term thinking. It's like, why would you ally with them? There's no real motivation other than money. Don't get me wrong, the writing's not terrible, it's just overall lackluster. The crew have some really nice ideas behind them. You get some nice little scenes on the spaceship with them. But the problem is those scenes are random whenever you go on the spaceship, and they do loop. There's also the various conversations you have when you're walking around when you have two companions, which it can also be quite a bit of fun, and occasionally you get commentary when they're doing things in quests. But sometimes only one of them will speak up, not both of them, which is a bit of a problem, because I noticed if I had to reload a quest, that they'd say different things, you know, and I'd be like, hey, how much content am I missing out here? I mean, they're trying to make it replayable, so you'll take different companions around, but honestly, you'll usually pick your favourites, or the ones that are most useful, or most thematic for an area, rather than any old companion. And the companion quests dry up very quickly. Now, in Fallout New Vegas, you had your companions, they had very long quest strings, they were quite interesting. And with the Outer Worlds, well, each companion has basically one quest string, some of them much shorter than others, and then it's done. You can't really talk to them about anything, you can't interact with them about anything, and it's just, it feels empty. That's the biggest problem. For the most part, the game is made up of, well, tedious fetch quests and clumsy moral decisions, which don't really have much effect. For example, and this one's a minor spoiler, when you find out through the game there's this thing called early retirement. It's partially done by a lottery, you have to fill a form to take part, and then you find on one of the main areas of the planet that people are arriving to go to their dream retirement place. Now, instantly, having played already 30-40 hours into this game, I was like, no way in hell are the corporations going to actually allow people to retire early through a lottery. And you look at the people, most of them are kind of very old. There's no young people there. So I'm looking at this and going, alright, is it going to be A, Soylent Green? We know there's nutrition problems, so are they going to get, like, exsanguinated and turned into food? Are they going to be option B, put into slave labour? It's like, oh, you're going to a retirement centre and then put into the bowels of the planet to work on stuff away from prying eyes, which would have been relatively interesting. Or C, they actually do get the retirement zone, but it's a lot more sinister and they're actually being subtly experimented on. Now, guess what happens? you get someone of the locals who are like, oh, we don't need peasants are here. The workers shouldn't be coming to our opulent city. We should get rid of them. And how dare they get to go early retirement? They don't deserve that. Go investigate for me. So you do. And what happens? Oh, look. There is a wonderful corridor explaining all these wonderful things of life. You have to sign a disclaimer form saying, oh, yes, we're not responsible for any harm that comes to you if you do get harmed on your way to early retirement. And if you don't claim any of your belongings, we collect them within 24 hours and become property of the company. I'm like, oh dear, this is definitely sounding sinister, but it's really damn obvious. So you go down a lift, everyone's dead. They've basically been lowered into a pit with robots waiting to kill them. And I'm just like, well, this is possibly the most boring way they could have done this side quest. And then I'm looking at it more and going, this is a lost opportunity. Quite a bit of a lost opportunity. Because it makes no sense. Why, if you had this early requirement, why not just space them? Why not just kill them on the spaceship on the way here? Why go to this big, very obvious visual, which I should point out, no one sees other than the retirees themselves. It's like on the side of a spaceport that is actually marked out for the retirees to go to, so it's not like there's a very public scene of people going to their happy retirement. And yes, you can go back to the person and you can tell them the truth, which then makes the board angry with you and the person not really believe you very much. Or you can lie to them and go, hey, yeah, it is a wonderful place. You could sneak in there. Because they're such an unlikable soul that you don't care if they go get themselves killed. And there's a lot of kind of mini things in this game where, because you get XP for lying or persuading or using any of the skills in conversation, it kind of affects your options a lot. Because it's like, I could say this, which is interesting, or I could say this and get XP and level up. So you're kind of like shoehorned into ideal responses or acting like a complete lying jerk or asshole constantly rather than role-playing the way you want to. And that's what the thing with these quests, because you'd think, oh look, this thing that everyone's looking forward to, this big contest, I've got proof that everyone's been murdered, who wins it? I should be able to do something with this. No, it never comes up again other than that one person who asked about it. No way of doing it. And the factions themselves are pretty dull. Now I've mentioned them. Now, you have several people you can do jobs for that will either make the faction like you. You get a discount at that faction. Or you can make them hate you. You can make them like you and hate you at the same time, which is kind of interesting. But I honestly didn't see any reason in aggravating people. I've just done my best not to randomly go around and murder everybody. So, I mean, I think the only thing that making them negative opinion towards you does is make them more likely to be hostile. There's no indication of why in the game you would want to do this. I mean, it's probably going to happen when I get to the very end of the game, when I take on the board, but so far, there's been absolutely no purpose for it. And there doesn't seem to be any conflict between the factions either. There is mentions of conflict, and certainly one of the main quests kind of have you doing jobs between two of them and you have to pick a side, and that seems to be a constant thing. You pick one route or the other, or alternatively to take a third option where you can, and the third option is always the best option. But it just seems to be a conflict in stasis. Nothing happens without the player's involvement. There's no indication of this going on without the player's involvement. And overall, other than just doing the quest there and then, you don't feel that you do any world-changing or even environment-changing events. It's like the original Fallouts. You did something, people would comment on it. Or you certainly felt you'd made a difference. Outer Worlds is just there. It's a plot for you to meander through clumsy mechanics, and at the end of the day you expected to replay it several times because of those damn achievements which are stupid and hard. I say no to that. Now, is it an absolutely dreadful game? No, but it is certainly a backstep. It is probably slightly worse than Fallout 3 in terms of narrative and the way stories are told. It's certainly no New Vegas, but if you want something which is some Fallout 3 like, with a sci-fi twist, and don't mind dropping a lot of money on it because it is really overpriced, then yeah, you probably go for it. But if you can find it on sale, maybe £5 or £10, I'd probably advise it then. But thank you for listening to me ramble and this, and I'm sorry to be a bit depressing, but I will catch you next time.